Greetings, my music friends. My name is Deepa Joshi. Welcome to the first episode of Raga Reads, a segment of Raga Room. Raga Reads is a space that carries carefully curated articles pertaining to music. We also bring to you writers, authors, thinkers, music aficionados who will come and talk to you about several gamuts of music. Today, we are happy to have with us Mr. Ramaprasad, who would talk to us about the music influence during the Hoysala Dynasty. Before we get into a discussion with Mr. Ramaprasad, a quick overview about the Hoysala Dynasty itself.
Set in the foothills of the forested terrain of lush western Ghats are located the twin cities of Beluru and Halebeedu. Popularly known for their intricate artistry and architecture, the celebrated Chennakeshwara Temple of Beluru and Hoysaleshwara Temple of Halebeedu were built during the Hoysala Dynasty. Beluru, being the earlier capital city of the Hoysalas, is located on the banks of the Yagachi River. The Chennakeshwara temple was devoted to God Vishnu. The richly sculptured exterior of the temple includes sculptures and depicts scenes from daily life, music, dance, and literature, and narrates scenes from the life of Vishnu and his reincarnations and the epics Ramayana and Mahabharata. During the zenith of their empire, Hoysalas moved their capital from Beluru to Halebeedu. The Hoysaleshwara temple at Halebeedu is the most exemplary architectural ensemble of the Hoysalas. The architecture grander than that of Belur. This temple is dedicated to Lord Shiva. The art and architectural scene during the Hoysalas represented the pinnacle of culture, encouraging dance, music, and literature. While we have all read about the grandeur of dance highlighted by the Hoysala queen, Shantala Devi, there are references and nuances that lead to understanding the musical influence in that era.
This is where Mr. Ramaprasad will come and talk to us about the music influence during the Hoysala Dynasty. Ramaprasad KV is an engineer by profession situated in the Bay Area of United States. He is an art and literature enthusiast by upbringing. He is passionate about Kannada and Samskrita literature, Indian classical music and other art forms and their history. He is trained in Karnataka Sangeeta and in Kavya Vachana, the art of musical reading of poems. He has composed over 50 original compositions in Karnataka Sangeeta, including Swarajatis, Varanas, Tillanas, and Ragamalikas. His write-ups about music have appeared in many journals, and he occasionally writes about literature and science-related topics. His book Hamsanada, written under the pen name Hamsanandi, is a collection of translations from Samskrita and was published in 2011. He has written several Kannada plays, some original and some adaptations. Mr. Ramaprasad and his wife Purnima have brought these plays and few musicals to stage through their Mandara creations in the San Francisco Bay Area. These shows have benefited several charitable causes. His Kannada translation of 8th century Samskrita work Amaru Shatakam is being published by the Sahitya Academy and will be out soon. It is our great pleasure to have Mr. Ramaprasad with us. Hello Ramaprasad ji, welcome to the Raga Reads. So happy to have you here.
Namaste Deepa ji, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you.
Very glad to be here in Raga Reads.
Thank you so much. It's our pleasure to have you here. So before we actually begin the show itself, I know we have some very interesting topic planned to talk today. But before we begin the show itself, I just wanted to find out, you have done such extensive research on musicology, Karnataka Sangeeta, and you have some varied interests about understanding the history of music and its form. So what inspired you to go in this direction?
Okay, I think I've been a student of music for a long time. My mother is a performer, so she used to teach, and I learned directly from her, as well as I learned from her teaching other students. That actually more than direct teaching, directly learning from her. And then, I was also curious about the science behind music. And as a young reader and as a young student, I got chance to look into some of these books my mother had. So I would just read them, even whether I understood it or not. But I think they did a good thing because they ultimately drove me to study more about the science or the mechanics behind Indian classical music, and then thereby with connected arts, other performing arts such as the stage, and therefore it's also connected to like the literary output from our past.
Excellent. This is actually an objective of Raga Reads itself, or Raga Room itself, if I were to say, because this is what we are working towards, to trace any form of music to its fundamentals and bringing it to our viewers. So, one can make a connection, the research becomes very interesting, and this gives us an opportunity to understand, study, and learn more about any art form that we want to explore. So, so glad to have you. So, beginning about the Hoysala dynasty itself, that is what we are discussing today. So, why the name Hoysala? And also, if you could talk a bit about the dynasty and the origin and things like that.
Oh well, Hoysala is a medieval dynasty that ruled the South Karnataka region primarily, and also parts of Tamil Nadu um, during the years approximately from 1000 Common Era to 1350. It's before the Vijayanagara times. The name Hoysala is quite interesting. There's a story associated with it. I'll come to that. But they basically are the rule from the area called what they call Gangawadi, so which is South Karnataka, you can say. And then their capital was in a place called what we call Halebidu now, or Dora Samudra. And before that, it was in Belur, close to that. And then before that, they actually ruled from a place called Angadi. Uh, the store about 100 years they ruled this area as like feudatories of the Chalukya rulers. Chalukyas were in the North Karnataka region, north of Tungabhadra, and south of Tungabhadra was the Hoysala dynasty. They came to power. And there are different stories, and some people are actually saying that the Hoysalas were part of the Gangas who ruled Gangawadi before, and one of the later rulers of Gangas who, after losing the kingdom to Cholas, probably they moved out, or a parallel family or a relative of that clan, they started the Hoysala dynasty. That's what is said. But in a inscription in Belur from the year 1117, it gives a fancy story about a Jaina Muni with a set of students in a place called Shashakapura. Shashakapura is same as Angadi. Now
Okay.
it's also called Sosevur. It's like in Chikmagalur district of Karnataka. So, and then there was a tiger who came there, and the Muni, the teacher, the guru, he said, "Poi Sala." So he gave a cane stick, and as Sala was a student, and he gave it to him to actually kill the tiger with the cane or with the stick. So Poi is take it out, and Salah is the name of the student. So that is what it is said. So this story comes from 1117. But before that, I think they were already there for the name Hoysala was even there before that. So I know some people say it's a fanciful story. We don't know what it is. Some people also say the story represents the king Vishnuvardhana actually throwing out the Chola kings whose emblem was tiger,
I see.
who had taken up the Ganga's capital Talkad and that area, and then Vishnuvardhana threw them out. He sent them back and then recaptured those areas, and then probably this story is a sort of a artistic representation of that. So whatever it is, it's very fascinating, and they initially they ruled this region, they expanded, and then during Vishnuvardhana's rule, they became independent kings, meaning they were not the feudatories of under the Chalukyas anymore. So their region went all the way up to the Krishna River, so which is in North Karnataka, and then into what is now Tamil Nadu, which is like Tiruvannamalai, east of Bangalore. And in their later times, they also expanded. They had some kind of love-hate relation with the kings in the Tamil Nadu. So they had marital relations with them, and then I think one of the kings married a princess from the Tamil kings Chola queens, and then their son then ultimately went out in there and started off a separate clan in Tamil Nadu called Samayapuram. That's where they ruled from too. And in 1312, when Alauddin Khilji's army came, and they defeated the Hoysalas, the Veerabalala III, I think, in that year. So then the family survived for some more time in the Tamil regions, and ultimately, when the Hakka Bukka were started, the Vijayanagara kings basically, whatever was Hoysala dominions before, they all became part of the Vijayanagara Empire. So that's like how they grew, and their rule ended. So they ruled about probably like 350 years, and in that time they have more than 150 temples done, and in their style, what we now know as the Hoysala style. So it's very interesting, and their contribution to art and culture of Karnataka has been tremendous.
Absolutely. And I like how beautifully you encapsulated uh, the origin up until the end of the dynasty. That was so beautifully done. It was very enriching for all of us to hear. You are a native of Hassan, and I'm a native of Bay,
Yes.
and we have visited these temples several times. And anybody who visits the temples of Belur or Halepidu or Somnathpura, they are always awestruck. No matter how many times you go to those temples, there is always something that you learn in terms of the architecture, in terms of the science that was used to build the temple. I mean, if we went on to talk about the architecture of these temples itself, we could be talking for days. So, tell us a little bit about the cultural scene during the Hoysala dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, the architecture is amazing. I think the it comes because of they I don't know what prompted it, because I know we see temples in Karnataka from all the way from about year 450 from the Chalukya's time. Then there were like cave temples, and then freestanding temples and all that. And we also know the Cholas were great builders, Pallavas, they all in Tamil Nadu. So they used a different kind of stone. But the I think what caused us like a revolution in Hoysala times, I don't know whether it was just the Hoysalas. Probably it started off with the Chalukyas themselves, but that is what the Hoysalas followed. They used what is called the soapstone. It's a soft kind of stone which can be used to carve very very intricate patterns. And then it's soft in the sense of what they say is it's soft when they're carving it, right, when they're sculpting it, and it gets hardened by years as it gets to exposed to water and so on. So that is the medium they use, and therefore I think they have done some of the very marvelous sculptures that you can ever imagine. In I think if the Chola temples are known for Chola and Vijayanagara temples are known for their grandeur in terms of their size, uh, the Hoysala temples are known for their intricacy and the attention to detail, and not leaving out even an inch of space uncarved or undecorated. That's really amazing. So I, as you mentioned, Belur, Halebid, and Somnathpura are very well known. But there are, as I said, there are more than like 150 temples. Some big, some small, and mostly, and surprisingly, not everyone was done by the kings themselves, but many of them we see were done by or got erected by their like the ministers or the sub officers or the smaller chieftains who ruled under this. So what we can see is there was an ecosystem of supporting these kinds of arts. So that's what comes to uh, that's what you can conclude. Basically, the society encouraged building of these temples. The temple is not just a place of praying. So it's the center of economy of the kingdom, so to say. So because if for to build a temple you need sculptors, you need engineers. I mean, we may not have called them engineers, they're called sapatis or acharyas, but they also had a regimen of study to do. They did not come out of air. They actually studied all those things to build those great structures, right? And then, so what that means is that supported a huge ecosystem of teachers and writers and those kinds of things on one side.
Oh,
And so
wonderful.
that means it supported so many students, right? That is coming on the other side. And once the temple is actually in place, then it has those the archakas, and then it needs flowers, so it supports the flower growers, and the temple does the annadana. That means, whoever destitute or cannot, don't have enough to eat, they come to the temple and they eat. So it supports the farmers. And then in the temple there is performance of dance and music going on. There are families of artists that are attached to the temple who come there every day and perform. So the artists and the whole paraphernalia, like all the musicians, dancers, the instrumentalists, and those people who are practicing, who are teaching. And then the temple also needs no, because it is feeding so many people, it needs what do you call, the potters, other craftsmen. So it's the center of the economy for a village life those times, or the whole kingdom. So basically it also gave to the revenue of the kingdom.
Right.
So hence it's like the like standing piece around which the whole society revolved.
Wow. Actually, if you put your mind on a visual mode and if you just envision all the things that you just said, and being in a temple setting of Beluru or Halebeedu, how nice that actually looks. So that is, yeah, for sure, that definitely depicts the cultural scene of during that time. What I mean, you said you were just talking about, it was not just the kings; it was there were also the ministers, and there were so many other people that were involved in the architecture or the planning of the temples and things like that. So, did they come off of the epics like the Ramayana, Mahabharata? What did it actually? Where did their inspiration or the source come from for these temples?
I think it came from a variety of sources. Yeah, of course, the deities and what we have as the Mula Murtis and the stories, they come from Ramayana, Mahabharata, or the Puranas, etc. And then what decorates outside, mostly you can see two or three different themes. If you go to, like, for example, Beluru or Halebeedu, right, you will see strips of animals, like the elephants in war, like the horses in, which are there in the army, right, cavalry. So that is part of the social life. And then there are strips of sculptures that shows scenes from the epics, right? You see scene whole of Mahabharata, or whole of Ramayana, or sections from that, depicted on there. And then there is also something that's very much seen is depiction of artists.
Yeah.
So artists and musicians. If I think there are certain temples where, I mean, it's not just in Karnataka. You'll find these things in other places too. Not where they did in, for example, I think Padma Subramaniam deciphered the 108 Karanas as described in Bharata's Natya Shastra, based on the sculptures in Chidambaram temple. And I hope I remember the name of the temple correctly. Similarly, there are such sculptures in Amritapura, I believe, one of the Hoysala temples, where the queen Lachala Devi or somebody, she is depicted in showing various dance poses. Even in if you see the Belur temple, you have the what we call the generally we call it Shilabalike popularly, and sometimes they are also called Apsaras. There are 32 of them on the outside wall, and I think 8 inside. So these are they all depict various dance poses. You know the famous Shukabhashini or Darpana Sundari and Natya Saraswati, these kinds of things. It is said that many of the Hoysala queens themselves were like modeled for these sculptures. I mean, you cannot really tell it. It doesn't. I don't think there is an inscriptional evidence, but there is evidence to say that the queens were very well read, were into the arts and music, and specifically about Queen Shantala, one of the main queen of Vishnuvardhana. It's also said she did perform in the temple. So I think an inscription in Belur says she was a patra. Patra is what we call patra, right? A patra is a
Yeah.
performer,
Yeah.
right? A role. That's what we understand it as today. But it refers to her as a patra. So that means she was actually performing in the temple. So many inscriptions tell about how they were like Saraswati in their playing the veena. There are inscriptions telling about how certain queens or other women played veena and other instruments. So it's the music was a central part of various sections of the society. It was not limited to just one or uh, one section, but music was well all around the community, and it was a necessity or considered a necessity for a certain kind of upbringing.
Wow.
I can mention here a work called Manasolasa, which was written by a uh, Chalukya king. So it was written by a Chalukya king Someshwara around the same time as Hoysalas, actually around 1100. He was probably like 20 years before the Belur temple was built. So this is like an encyclopedia. I don't know whether it's the first encyclopedia in India, but it's one of the first encyclopedias which talks about anything that you can find interesting. For example, it says basically how a king's life is organized, or what they study, what they do, in their spare time, how do they go for warfare, how do they engage in uh, arts, and how do they what kinds of food they have. It's a fascinating work that shows the time um, and culture of those times. So it might show the culture of a rich lifestyle. May not be of everyone, but I think it's still a big part of the lifestyle from the past.
It definitely gives an insight into how things were back in the day, and they
Yeah.
were all beautifully documented. And you did mention about a couple things that were a part of Manasollasa itself, and so we talked about it being an accessible document, right?
Yep, yep, yeah. Manasolasa is published. It's available in translation. It has like 100 chapters, and as mentioned, it also has talks about things like you know about Kambala. So the race of what is this Yamme Kona in Karavali, right? So buffaloes. Buffaloes. So it has about that, and it has things like hawks are kept as pets. We know that as it happens in Arabia, but it happened in India too.
Wow.
So all these kinds of things it talks about. It's very and it also has a section on food.
Okay.
Yeah, so it gives recipes of various things that were cooked those days. You might find it interesting that it lists dose. It calls it dosaka, and many other things. It's available in English translation, in Kannada translation, original too. Originally it's available on archive. So it's a fabulous book. One should anybody who is interested in culture 1,000 years ago, life 1,000 years ago, it's a book to go.
Wow. Um, you were talking also about Shantala Devi, Natya Rani Shantala Devi. So when you talked about her being able to perform in the temple, and them being a part of sort of designing a certain part of a temple or providing their inputs, it also goes to show that that part of empire was also progressive in terms of women being able to provide inputs to the kings, isn't it?
Of course, of course. Actually, it's surprising that most people who are talking about, oh, okay, women did not have proper roles in the past, etc., haven't gone through these things to see how untrue they are. Yeah, of course, injustice exists at any time. It shouldn't, but it exists. But to think that everything was unjust in the past and now we have to get over all those things is not right. If you see the inscriptions of the past, I mean, not just Hoysala inscriptions, most other inscriptions from Karnataka, you will see lots of instances where women were ruling the the smaller kingdoms. So the way it worked is, whether Hoysalas or Cholas, they did not rule from a strict center. They basically would have lots of smaller chieftains who would be ruling a smaller subsections of the kingdom, and they will be providing the revenue to the main king, right? So we have instances of many queens. We have actually talked, we can see them how Savia Bay, Jakka Way. I mean, there are so many names that you can pull out from those, who built temples, who built Jaina bastis, who built lakes, for irrigation. And also one specific instance that I remember is where she is praised as very fair because the taxes were very low in her ruling, so in her kingdom, right? So there are lots of people who were women who are mentioned, and in cases like these kings, like Vishnuvardhana, who had polygamy was in practice. Some of the queens were stationed at a different location. They would be actually ruling out smaller parts. Bammalai was stationed, one of the queens. She was ruling from somewhere else. It says when Vishnuvardhana was here. So basically, that's how they uh, probably control the kingdom, with family ties and the husband wife ruling different parts. So they definitely had the upbringing and the resources need to uh, rule and sort of run the administration.
Wow, so interesting. Um, Again, we have, and when you go to the temples and when you see the sculptures and things like that, you see a lot of dance forms. So you do understand that there was a lot of importance given to dance at that point in time. Um, Coming back to music itself, of course, like you just mentioned, that it is an ensemble of everything: the music, the performance, the dance. It's an ensemble. Without one, the other used to be incomplete
Mhm.
back in the day, is what you had mentioned. But drawing attention into the music scene, I know that not much of focus or not much has been sort of, may have been written, but they may not have been publicized about the music scene during that time itself. So that is where we'd like to talk about what was the music scene, and how did it all come about, the instruments, and how did it all work at that point in time.
We can infer quite a bit from what we see in the temples. As I said, you can see dance figures and musicians on the temple, and lot of has been actually published and researched very well by very well known scholars. Just that it's probably remained to only a few niche people who are just looking at access to those books, etc. A good thing with the advent of internet is now you can get to those inaccessible texts. Otherwise, you should have gone to a university library for a book which was published 100 years ago. But now it's at your fingertips. So that's the I think I'll say what happened with the year 2000, and all these things became more accessible to for people, for anyone who has interest in this area. Otherwise, I think there are people like R Satyanarayana, Mahamahopadhyaya R Satyanarayana, who is uh, a very well known Padma Shri. He passed away recently. he's one of the biggest music researcher from Karnataka. And then also we have other scholars like Raghavan and many others writing about these kinds of books. Jyotsna Kamath has written in detail about Manasollasa, for example. So these are more available and accessible now. I mean, that's for that. I think we have to be really thankful to the internet. So and also, the dissemination of information, just like we are doing now, these kinds of things is more important, and it becomes. Uh, these things doesn't have to be confined to a classroom setting. That's what I'm trying to say. You don't have to do a degree in Hoysala architecture to appreciate it, or you don't have to have a master's in music to appreciate these kinds of things. But anybody who is interested in classical arts can get to these things. That's the beauty of how I see it. If you are talking specifically about music, I think we have many friezes on the temples where you can see different instruments, and also Okal is standing there, playing a veena, playing different kinds of instruments. Maybe we can go through some of those
Absolutely.
examples and see what it is. So
Yes.
as I was telling you earlier, in the Indian context, the Sangita originally meant included dance.
Mm.
So Geetam Vadyancha Nrityancha Trayam Sangita Muchyate. So that is what the ancient texts tell us. So this is from around the time of Natya Shastra, which is approximately, you can say, 2000 years ago. And 2000 years ago, if you studied the Natya Shastra, you'll see it was already a very fine. It's not like a primitive system of music, but by then it was already a very, it was something that was very thorough and very nicely done with lots of different types of instruments. I mean, it was meant to accompany a play, well put play which had an instrumental ensemble, a vocalist, drummer, everything. So that's where we come from. So from the time of Natya Shastra to Hoysalas, it's at least 1,000 years.
Wow.
So okay, so in those 1,000 years, it can only have gotten better than what
Evolved.
Natya
Yes.
Shastra describes.
Yes.
So there's said, like, plethora of instruments, number of different instruments that are mentioned in texts. So we can see some of those examples in the sculptures.
Yeah.
So sometimes what happens is when you're reading a text, I mean, the texts are actually written in a way to explain who is already knowing something about it. So that's the I would say drawback of Indian um, text. If someone reads it, they may not be able to visualize what it is, because it's not just a part. it's
Yeah.
it's the part of a whole thing. So you have to know the whole cultural environment to understand that. So it assumes that when you are talking about music, it assumes so many things that are behind behind it. So somebody who is not familiar with that may find that these texts are inadequate to reconstruct what was there. But if you see in the whole context, I think it'll become clearer.
Sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So when we were going through your blog, so well written and so informative. So that's where you had posted pictures, and you explained what those instruments were and the ensemble. So if we can take a look at those pictures, and if you could tell us about it.
Okay. Um, Here is an article that I wrote many, many years ago. Maybe there is I can add more stuff into that, or update that, but I haven't done. I've been a bit lazy. But I think we have some examples there to show our readers what we can infer from those. So here is a picture. I would say it's depicting Saraswati.
Mhm.
And she has, we know that, we call Ya Kundendu Tushar Haradhawala, Ya Shubhra Vastravrata, Ya Veena Varadanda Manditakara. So she has the danda of the Veena in her hand. So that's the typical explanation of Saraswati we have. And true to that, she has a Veena in her hand. A Veena, now we expect a Veena to look in a certain way. because we all have grown up seeing Chitti Babu's veena. That veena is called Saraswati veena, and that is a the form is quite recent, meaning it's come in the 1700s or 1800s, probably 1700s. So that is when this current form of veena started. So before that, a veena is a generic name for any stringed instrument.
Okay.
So if you look at it, a guitar is a veena,
Right.
a mandolin is a veena, a sitar is a veena, a santur is a veena. This is how like Bharatanaट्य Shastra talks. So I mean, they talk about instruments. Okay, veena is a
A
stringed
stringed.
instrument. So that is what it is. So Saraswati has a string instrument in her hand, and in different sculptures she has different types of veenas too. So in this particular one, we can see the danda, we can see, and we can also see she's holding it this way, right? So it's not flat like it is played now, but it's kept cross.
Uh-huh.
You can see that similar is the way how sitarists keep the instrument even now,
Right.
right? So they keep it across. So that's what she's holding. And in this particular picture, we don't see a resonator, so we don't know how it functioned without a resonator. Uh, we have seen some folk instruments where the resonator is either absent or is very small. So it could be one of those cases. Particularly now, we are used to seeing a bigger resonator on this side, and on the left side, right on the yali side. Also, we have a fake resonator. So it's surprising, but probably there were instruments which had this kinds of just a danda. It's basically made of a bamboo. Uh, the whole body itself might work as a resonator, and then there are strings.
Got
So
it.
therefore, there wasn't a need for a bigger resonator on one end. That could be a reason. So that is the Saraswati's veena. Then let's say, okay, here is another instrument. It's a drum, and if you can see that, you can see that the drummer
Has.
has put his fingers into the ropes that are part of the drum. So this was called, and then it's actually hung from the shoulders. So if you're surprised, how will they have it, right? Either it's hung from the shoulder, or they have it on their hands. It's they're held by one hand, and it's played on the other hand.
Wow.
Okay,
One should
so
also give credit to how beautifully it was sculpted too, right? To
yeah,
show.
yeah. That is another another dimension, and you can actually see how the rope is sculpted. It almost feels like you can touch and feel the fiber.
Yeah.
So that's how they have done it in stone. That's to the master Hoysala sculptors. But coming back to the instrument itself, this is what is called idakka now. It's still used in, I think, in the Tulunad and in Kerala. So for their yakshagana, I'm not very sure whether they use it for yakshagana, but maybe in other like bhutaradhana things, or other rituals, they might be using that instrument. I haven't really seen. I know that in Kerala temples they are used. So they call it idakka. So this the name during those times, based on what we see in books, is called auja.
Okay.
Auja is actually coming from, it's a Prakrita word. It's coming from Atodhya. Atodhya is uh, how the Natya Shastra tells about the instruments. It has a chapter called Atodhya Prakaranam. So it has Veena Prakaranam, it has Atodhya Prakaranam. Atodhya is the instrument section. So that's what they're talking about. So the Atodhya becomes like Avoja, Auja. So that becomes auja, and then the one that has that comes on the shoulder is called skandauja. So skanda is shoulder, so it's hung from the shoulder, and then he can play. Because if they're standing and playing, like just like in another swaram ensemble, if they're walking across, going around the temple, while playing, they have to put it on their shoulder. So it's skandauj. And for that matter, the Hindustani instrument, what we call pakawaj. Pakawaj also comes from the same thing. It's paksha is side. In Kannada also we have the same word, right? Pakka on one side. E pakka, pakka ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತೀವಿ. So pakshauja, and it has become pakawaj.
Okay. Okay.
So you can see how the name got carried all the way from Natyashastra times. So to 1,000+ years. We see these names mentioned in many of the Kannada. Not just in Kannada. I'm telling only because I have read some of those things. In many of the Puranas, even in Pampa's work, Pamparana, those times in Harihara. So they all talk about situations where there are music concerts. Music concert were called like Kelike. So that was the name given. So there are plenty of instances where music and dance are described in those stories or Puranas. I'll go to the next picture. Here, actually, you can see it is probably, I think, is like an ensemble of 3 musicians. Here you see a lady with a veena. So now you can see the veena is held vertical. So I can see the frets. You can see the frets, and to me it looks like a precursor of the sitar, where the frets are movable. So in current days Carnatic Sangeeta, the frets are not movable; they are fixed. But in sitar, they are still movable. The reason was, for playing different ragas, they would actually adjust the frets so that they don't have to really pull the strings, or they can play the raga in within one string.
Okay.
So now the current techniques are different, but this is how it was. This
Correct me
keeping
if I'm wrong, but does it also signify like scale changer? Is that what it was, or it is totally unrelated?
it could be, yeah, it's like a scale changer. Basically, instead of keeping multiple multiple frets for the single note, in the sense, if you go to current veena, you play the Shuddha Rishabha on one fret, you play Chaturshruti Rishabha on another fret, right? You also play it with, like, flexing the string and all that. That's all, more how you produce the gamakas. But there is a fret. What I mean to say is, for each swarasthana in the octave, there is a fret.
Okay.
So there are 12 swarasthanas in the octave, and there will be 12 frets. But here probably there were like 7 swarasthanas and 7 frets, and then the position of the fret itself was moving.
Okay.
So you can notice that the veena the artist is having is kept vertical. You can see that the Rudra veena today, it's played like that. So you can see, artists who are, and even our veena was played like that, a century ago. There are certain people who play it like this. I think there is a recording of a veena ensemble in the Srirangam temple, where there are like 50 vainikas, everyone holding the veena vertical. It's
Wow.
Yeah, I think you can find it some on YouTube. It's really interesting. And then in this ensemble, we see 3 artists. One is a vainika, and there is another person, another artist playing the auja or edaka, and there is the third one, which I think is a vocalist, because she's not having any instrument in her hand, so she probably is the vocalist. Okay, so let me go to another picture. Here we see another vainika. I'm not very sure whether it's representing Saraswati, because it's representing an ensemble from a music scene. This is probably not Saraswati, because she has 2 hands. It's like, it's a human. It's not one with Chaturbhuja. So here you can see her holding the veena in a cross manner, just like to today's sitar, and you can very well see how the frets are placed, and you can also see how nicely the fingers have shown. Now it's like, sometimes when you watch a movie, you'll see the person who is playing the veena has never been taught how to move her fingers on there, and it looks very awkward for someone who is knowing music. But here you can see that exact the way that the hands are kept there, that it is sculpted by someone who knows these things very well, who is exposed, who knows how the fingers will shape when they're strumming, when they are placing on multiple strings. So this shows how interconnected these arts were.
And attention to detail in every little thing that they have sculpted.
Exactly. I mean, attention to detail is something that you should tell. Anybody going to a Hoysala temple, uh, I mean, you can talk about for ages, because there are scenes where I think, for example, the Krishna holding the Govardhana, where on Govardhana they will show all kinds of life, all kinds of animals, and there is not a centimeter of stone uncarved. So it's just unimaginable. So that is a kind of work they have done.
Absolutely.
Here, I go to another picture, which is a very interesting instrument. If you look at it, it looks like there is a hood of a snake on the top, on the instrument, and then there is a bow that the artist is using. So if you look at it, it's very much like a violin that we have today. So this is called a nagavina. So naga, because it has the hood on there, and uh, it just like today's violin, there are no frets. You can see that there are no frets. It's a plain fretboard, and it's not showing the strings, but in the sculpture you cannot really see the strings, but you can very well see that there is a bow, and it's played with a bow. So now we know that we have things like sarangi, which are played with a bow. And violin, which is used in Carnatic Sangita, is a import from the West in the 18th century. But probably this existed back then. It went out of vogue, but when Muthuswami Dikshita and his brothers, they saw the British not flautists, fiddlers playing, they got inquisitive. They got the instrument. They started experimenting, and they made it our own. I mean, now you cannot say that violin is not an Indian instrument.
Right, right. It becomes a part of your accompaniment whenever
Yes.
you sing.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The next ensemble that I have is there are three artists again. I think there is a dancer. Sorry, that's not a dance. It's a ensemble for dance. So one probably is the Natuanar, which who has the bells in her hand, and there's the drummer having the idaka or the auja, and there is a float. So in fact, a flute is one of the most ancient instruments known to Indians, not just to Indians, to the mankind. Actually, I think they have found a flute made of bone about 40,000 years ago
Oh my.
in Germany. Yeah, so that's what I read somewhere. So it's one of the earliest instruments humans tried to make. So that's where it comes from. Early man had some kind of proto flute in his hand. So a flute in a Natya Shastra is called a Sushira Vadya, means an air instrument, and we know that from the description there that a flute was a must for the ensemble, and it was used as the accompaniment. So unlike Veena has been given a very high importance in back then. So Veena was a solo instrument, or it was the main instrument. It's not used as like an accompaniment to vocal.
It was a
Um,
very integral part of music or
yeah. So
culture.
flute was definitely used as an accompaniment, as an aid to enhance the beauty of music. We don't know whether they would have a flute concert or flute as a main artist, but it was definitely used for in addition to make the ensemble much brighter. And we also know that I think it was also used for keeping the shruti. I don't know when we started keeping the tamburi, but because unlike other instruments, a flute doesn't change its pitch. right? Flute has the holes already set. So when you play, it always plays in the same shruti. So therefore, when when in a concert, when you see when they want to switch to Madhyam Shruti, they will pick up a different flute because you cannot play it on the same flute.
Right, right.
So I think for that reason, flute was kept used as a shruti keeper. They would like have everybody aligned to that, and they will match their shruti with the flute so that they are all aligned.
Wow. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I have to tell you this, that only when we are talking to people like yourself who has this kind of a background, these are things that we are seeing on a daily basis, but it just doesn't make sense to us. Like I, for one, used to think, why? I mean, of course, you do know with different pitch, you change flutes and things like that, but this makes absolute sense in how this was this instrument was used to actually maintain the Shruti. That is a very interesting find.
Yeah, I mean it's fascinating how much art has been, music has been part of our culture. It has like ingrained into everything in our lives, and still there is a lot more to learn.
Absolutely. It's
Still a lot
evolving.
more to learn. So
Yeah.
because what has gone in last 2000 years, and we know, I mean, we see things changing in our music even now. New instruments get introduced. We know the very famous example of mandolin, which became, right in front of our eyes, became a mainstream instrument, right? Until it only needs a person of the caliber of U. Srinivas, right? Who was so passionate to bring an instrument that was totally alien to us and make it suitable for playing Indian music. And then now, we have many artists who play that in the concert platform. So hence, I think Indian music has never been like stagnant, but it has never gone away from its basics. So I
Wow.
think as long as you don't forget that, forget the beauty of the rasas, or whatever we are talking about in music, and innovations always come in a small bursts, and then as long as they can be matched well with your foundation, right? They should look good together. So then there's absolute freedom for an artist, for a musician, to make changes, make it more even more beautiful than what it was.
Very, very profound. Does make a lot of sense when you say that, for centuries on, we've had music. Fundamental has been the same. It still conforms to a certain framework, but each time we come up with a new composition, it sounds different, but still the fundamentals and the basics are strong,
Exactly. Yep.
solid,
Yep.
and have been maintained for
Yep.
centuries. I think we should consider ourselves very fortunate to be in a system like this where we have a form of art that has been so solid and strong for very
Very
many.
true. Very true. Very true. I think we don't give enough attention, or we don't know enough to appreciate how blessed we have been. I think the more we learn about these things, and that tells us why carrying these things to future generations is very important. And it's very easy to lose something. For example, on some instruments, we have 1,000 years ago this nagarvina was there, now it is not there. And it's very hard to actually, uh, unless there is a description of how it is made, looking at the sculpture, now it may be hard for someone to come up with an instrument, or even imagine how it might have sounded. How did it sound?
Yeah,
Did it sound like today's violin? Did it sound different? How was it? Was it a mainstream instrument, or was it very rare? It's very hard to tell.
right.
So that's why I think the new innovations are very hard to come by. So it's very important that we don't lose what we already have.
Yes, definitely. And I thank you so much, Rampasaji, for spending so much of your time and sharing with us such interesting facts about the Hoysala dynasty. It's always great to go back in history. And when we were studying history, we quite did not delve so much into it. But as you develop an interest in a certain topic, it would be great to research and find out more. And through your blog, you have created a lot of awareness in various topics, not just this, but you have been writing about musicology, Natya Shastra. You have also stayed several places. So We will connect our viewers with your work, and it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. And we look forward to talking with you again pretty soon.
Thank you, Deepaji. It was my pleasure to be here on Raga Room and talk about few things that I really, associate myself and that are very close to my heart. So it's always a pleasure to talk to someone, number one, who is from the Hoysala country, so where I come from, and also interested in the things like music and other performing arts, which I feel very much connected to. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Friends, we hope you enjoyed this episode and learning more about the Hoysala dynasty and its cultural scene. Check out our website, the Raga Reads page, to get more information about this topic and the author. We hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you and see you soon.